On my wedding day, not a single family member showed up. Not even my father, who promised to walk me down the aisle. They all left for my sister's baby shower that was happening on the exact same day. The next morning, I posted one single photo on my Instagram. Within an hour, I had 320 missed calls and frantic text messages. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. I stood in the center of the bridal suite at the Botanical Gardens, staring blankly at the live video feed on the venue monitor. My custom silk gown cascaded perfectly to the floor, catching the soft afternoon light. But I could not focus on the dress or the beautiful floral arches I had spent months designing. My eyes were fixed on the screen showing the ceremony space. The groom's side was packed with Marcus's family and friends laughing and chatting. The bride's side had 50 chairs set up. All 50 chairs were completely empty. Not a single aunt, not a single cousin, and definitely not my parents, Vivian and Desmond. The silence in the suite was deafening. My stomach tied itself into a tight, painful knot. I had known my family was obsessed with appearances and social climbing, but leaving me completely alone on my wedding day was a new low. The door clicked open and Marcus walked in. He looked incredibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, but his jaw was clenched tight. He was holding my phone in his hand, and the look in his dark eyes told me everything I needed to know. He did not look pitying. He looked furious. He handed me the phone without saying a word. The screen was lit up with a long text message from my mother, Vivian. I took a deep breath and began to read the words that would officially sever my ties to my bloodline. The message read, "Nia Chloe's floral vendor completely messed up the color scheme for her baby shower. It is an absolute disaster. Bryce's wealthy family is flying in from out of state, and we cannot look like amateurs in front of his old money crowd. You know how important this is for our family image. You and Marcus are just doing a small ceremony anyway, so you do not really need us there. Walk yourself down the aisle. You are a strong, independent woman. Take an Uber to the airport afterward for your little honeymoon. We will send a gift basket next week." I read the message twice. The sheer audacity of her words burned through my chest. My mother was choosing a baby shower over my wedding because she wanted to impress my white brother-in-law Bryce and his supposedly elite family. She was telling me to take an Uber from my own wedding. I slowly set the phone face down on the vanity table. My hands were perfectly steady. A few years ago, a message like this would have broken me. I would have cried, ruined my makeup, and begged them to come. I spent my entire life shrinking myself to make my sister Chloe shine. If I brought home an award, my mother would hide it so Chloe would not feel bad about her grades. When I decided to skip the legacy sorority, pledging to focus on building my business, my parents treated me like a disgrace to our African American heritage. They worshipped the ground Chloe walked on because she married Bryce, who constantly bragged about his family trust fund and generational wealth. They thought Bryce was their golden ticket to the highest tier of society. They viewed my fiancé Marcus and me as the struggling, hardworking couple who just could not measure up. They thought my private equity firm was just a small, risky startup. They assumed we were constantly drowning in massive debt and struggling to pay our monthly rent. They had absolutely no idea that Marcus and I had quietly built a billion-dollar real estate empire. They had no idea that I held the keys to their entire existence. I looked up and met Marcus's gaze in the mirror. He stepped behind me, placing his warm hands on my bare shoulders. He did not offer empty platitudes or tell me it was going to be okay. He knew exactly who my parents were, and he knew exactly who I was. "Are we doing this?" he asked, his voice calm and grounding. I turned around and looked at the man who had stood by me while I built my company from nothing. "Yes," I said, my voice completely clear. I did not shed a single tear. I picked up my bouquet of white orchids and walked out of the bridal suite with my head held high. Marcus walked right beside me. We did not need my father to give me away because I belonged to myself. As the heavy wooden doors to the garden opened, the string quartet began to play. I walked down the aisle staring straight ahead, ignoring the glaring emptiness of the 50 chairs on my left. I focused only on the family Marcus had brought, who smiled and wiped away tears of joy for us. I reached the altar and handed my bouquet to the coordinator. The officiant began to speak about love and endurance, but my mind was already executing my next move. I pulled Marcus close as we prepared to exchange our vows. I leaned up on my tiptoes, brushing my lips against his ear. "Call the corporate lawyers," I whispered, my tone sharp and lethal. "Execute the foreclosure on Bryce's family estate immediately. By tomorrow morning, they will have absolutely nothing." Marcus smirked and squeezed my hand. The wedding was beautiful, but the real celebration was just beginning. My name is Nia, and I am 32 years old. On my wedding day, not a single family member showed up. Not even my father, who promised to walk me down the aisle. They all left for my sister's baby shower that was happening on the exact same day. The next morning, I posted one single photo on my Instagram. Within an hour, I had 320 missed calls and frantic text messages. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. As Marcus slid the heavy diamond band onto my finger, my eyes drifted past his shoulder to the 50 empty chairs arranged perfectly on the lawn. Desmond promised to give me away. Instead, he chose to prioritize a balloon arch and a catered brunch. Looking at that space, my mind snapped back to the rehearsal dinner 14 hours prior. The sting of their absence was completely overshadowed by the absolute audacity they had displayed the night before. We booked an exclusive Atlanta steakhouse to celebrate Marcus and me. Instead, Vivian and Desmond turned it into a preliminary celebration for Chloe and Bryce. My mother spent the evening making sure every family member knew Chloe was carrying an old money heir. Vivian stood at the head of the table, tapping her crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon to demand everyone's attention. I sat there expecting a toast to my upcoming marriage. Instead, Vivian raised her glass to Chloe's slightly rounded stomach. To the future, she announced, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "To my beautiful Chloe and her amazing husband Bryce, who are bringing a true legacy into this world. It is such a blessing to see our family line merge with true historical wealth. A child born into that kind of prestige is what every mother dreams of for her daughters." Desmond chimed in, patting Bryce on the back. He looked right at Marcus, who was sitting quietly next to me. "Do not worry, Marcus," Desmond said with a condescending smirk. "Not everyone can marry into the kind of generational wealth Bryce comes from. You and Nia are doing just fine with your little real estate flips. It builds character to struggle a bit in the beginning." Marcus just squeezed my knee under the table, keeping his composure. We had learned long ago that arguing with my parents about our finances was a complete waste of breath. They needed to believe I was beneath Chloe so they could justify their blatant favoritism. If they admitted I was successful, it would destroy the carefully curated illusion that Chloe was the ultimate prize. After the humiliating toast, the dinner devolved further. Chloe inspected my engagement ring with a sigh. "It is a cute ring, Nia," she purred loud enough for everyone to hear. "And your dress for tomorrow is so quaint. It is adorable that you guys are doing a budget wedding. Bryce bought my custom gown in Paris for $30,000, but I completely understand working with what you have." I smiled tightly, taking a slow sip of my water. I did not mention my vintage couture dress was worth more than her entire wedding budget, or that my ring was flawless. I let her have her moment. Then came the ultimate insult. Bryce stood up, smoothing the lapels of his tailored suit. He walked over to my chair and pulled a crumpled personal check from his inner pocket. He slid it across the white tablecloth right past my dinner plate. I looked down. It was a check made out to me for $500. "Here," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance, "to help out with your little budget wedding. Real wealth takes generations to build, Nia. You should have married into a legacy like Chloe did instead of playing businesswoman. You cannot hustle your way into high society." I stared at the check. The paper felt thin and cheap under my fingertips. I looked up at Bryce, taking in his smug smile and the triumphant gleam in Chloe's eyes. My parents beamed with pride at their wealthy son-in-law, marveling at his supposed generosity. What none of them knew, what absolutely nobody in that room realized, was that I had just watched Bryce at the bar 10 minutes earlier. I had seen him try to order a bottle of vintage scotch to impress my uncle. I had seen the bartender run his sleek metal credit card. And I had seen the machine flash red with a declined message. Bryce had quickly snatched the card back, whispering furiously to the bartender before scurrying away. He was standing here humiliating me with a $500 check from an account that I knew for a fact was completely overdrawn. Before I could even process the sheer comedy of his fake charity, Vivian slid a thick leather-bound folder across the table toward me. It was the invoice for Chloe's baby shower venue and catering. Nia Vivian said, her tone shifting from celebratory to demanding. The country club needs the $15,000 deposit for Chloe's shower tomorrow morning. Since you and Marcus are saving so much money on your little ceremony, we need you to cover this. Consider it your wedding gift to your sister. After all, family takes care of family. They were extorting me to fund the very event they were using as an excuse to skip my wedding. I looked at the invoice, then at the $500 check from the broke man they worshipped. I did not argue. I did not yell. I calmly pulled out my black card and handed it to the manager. He swiped it and whispered. His card declined earlier. Should I cut off his credit line? I smiled warmly at him. Not quite yet. The memory of that rehearsal dinner faded as Marcus kissed me, pulling me back to the present moment. We stood at the altar, newly pronounced husband and wife, beneath a breathtaking arch of white roses and lush, trailing greenery. The string quartet swelled into a joyous, uplifting symphony. As we turned to face our guests, the contrast in the seating was violently clear. To my right, Marcus's family and friends erupted into applause, their faces glowing with genuine happiness and unconditional love. To my left, the 50 empty chairs sat in pristine, mocking silence. My mother, my father, my sister, my entire bloodline had chosen a balloon arch and a fake display of wealth over my wedding day. But as Marcus laced his fingers firmly through mine, I did not feel a single shred of sorrow. I felt lighter than I had in 3 decades. I was finally free from their toxic performance. We walked back down the aisle, stepping out into the sunlit courtyard of the botanical gardens. The plan was to head straight into the grand ballroom for our reception, a lavish space I had meticulously designed with crystal chandeliers, towering floral centerpieces, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate. But before we could even take a moment to celebrate our new marriage in private, the heavy glass doors of the venue swung violently open. The head venue manager, a usually composed and impeccably dressed man named Thomas, practically ran toward us. His face was entirely pale, his breathing shallow, and he was clutching his silver clipboard to his chest like a shield. He looked absolutely terrified, completely stripping away the polished professionalism he had maintained for the last 6 months of event planning. Nia, Marcus, I am so incredibly sorry to interrupt this sacred moment, Thomas stammered, grabbing my arm and pulling us into a quiet alcove away from the gathering guests. We have a massive crisis in the kitchen, and I simply did not know what else to do. Marcus immediately stepped in front of me, his protective instinct flaring up instantly. What is going on, Thomas? The guests are about to enter the ballroom for cocktail hour. Is there an issue with the floral setup or the seating arrangements? Thomas wiped a heavy bead of sweat from his forehead. The setup is absolutely perfect. It is the catering. The entire service has been halted since 8 o'clock this morning. I frowned, my perfectly cultivated calm beginning to crack at the edges. Halted. We paid the $50,000 deposit months ago. We confirmed the Wagyu beef and truffle risotto tasting menu last week. Why on earth is the kitchen halted on the day of the event? Thomas looked down at his clipboard, his hands visibly shaking. Because your mother called us this morning. She called our main corporate office in an absolute panic. She told our staff that the wedding had been violently called off. She said you and Marcus had a terrible falling out last night and that the entire event was canceled permanently. I stared at him, the sheer magnitude of Vivian's deceit settling over me like a suffocating weighted blanket. She called you on my wedding day to cancel my catering. It gets much worse, Thomas said, his voice dropping to a harsh, nervous whisper. She did not just try to cancel the service. She demanded that our kitchen staff box up the entire 5-course meal for 200 people and immediately transport it to the Oakwood Country Club across town. She stated that since the food was already paid for, it needed to be redirected to her other daughter's baby shower to avoid unnecessary waste. Marcus let out a low, dark chuckle that held absolutely no humor. She tried to steal our wedding reception food to feed Bryce's family. Thomas nodded quickly, flipping through the papers on his clipboard. Yes, and she also demanded that the remaining balance of your venue deposit be refunded directly to her personal credit card. When my staff informed her that we could not authorize a transfer of venue location or financial funds without your direct signature, she became completely irate. She sent us a formal cease and desist email on what looked like official legal letterhead, claiming she was the primary financial sponsor of this wedding and that we were illegally holding her assets hostage. Our corporate office panicked and froze the kitchen staff until we could get legal verification from you. The puzzle pieces slammed into place with devastating clarity. Bryce's credit card had declined at the rehearsal dinner because he was broke. My parents had drained their own savings accounts trying to keep up with his fake old money lifestyle. They did not have the cash to pay the country club for Chloe's lavish baby shower. So Vivian decided to sabotage my wedding, steal the 5-star catering I had quietly paid for, and try to extort a cash refund from my venue to cover their bouncing checks. She was willing to ruin the most important day of my life just to make sure Chloe's baby shower looked perfect for a group of superficial strangers. I felt a cold, calculating calm wash over my entire body. My mother had played her final desperate card, and she had played it terribly. Thomas, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, cutting through his panic. Did my mother sign a single contract with this venue? No, Thomas replied quickly, shaking his head. Did she process a single payment for this event? No, he said again with absolute certainty. Everything was paid through your private corporate account. I unclasped my small bridal clutch and pulled out my heavy metal black card. I handed it directly to the panicked manager. Run this for whatever penalty fee the corporate office needs to unfreeze the kitchen immediately. I commanded, my tone leaving no room for argument. Pay the entire staff double overtime for the rush preparation. I want vintage champagne flowing into the guests' glasses the second they walk through those doors. Thomas took the black card, his shoulders dropping in a massive sigh of profound relief. Thank you, Nia. I will get the kitchen moving right now. I am so deeply sorry she put you through this on your special day. Do not apologize, I said, a slow, freezing smile spreading across my face. In fact, you are going to do me one more favor before you head back to the kitchen. Thomas paused, looking up from the heavy metal card in his hand. Anything you need. My mother claims she was the primary financial sponsor of this wedding, right? I want you to draft up a new, highly itemized invoice for the entire cost of this reception. Every single floral arrangement, every bottle of imported champagne, every single hour of staff overtime. Make the total look as intimidating and official as possible. Thomas looked deeply confused but nodded slowly. Okay, and where exactly should I send this invoice? Send it directly to the Oakwood Country Club, addressed to Bryce's Family Trust, I said, my voice dripping with lethal anticipation. Tell them it is the outstanding balance for the baby shower catering they requested. Let us see what happens when that massive invoice bounces right in front of all their elite guests. I walked away from the panicked venue manager, leaving him to process the destruction of my mother's demands. Marcus guided me out the side exit of the botanical gardens, where a sleek black armored SUV was already waiting with the engine running. I slid into the leather seat, pulling my vintage couture gown behind me. As the vehicle pulled away, I did not look back. I felt no lingering sadness over the vacant chairs. My family had made their choice clear. Now, it was my turn to make mine. The drive to the private airport took less than 30 minutes. We bypassed the chaotic commercial terminals and pulled straight up to the private tarmac. A Gulfstream jet waited with its stairs already lowered. Flight attendants stood ready to welcome us aboard. My parents always believed I was financially struggling. They loved to tell their elite social circle that my private equity firm was a highly unstable startup destined for failure. They warned me that women who focused on risky business ventures would end up destitute. I never corrected them. I never told them about our massive acquisitions. I knew that the moment my mother smelled real money, she would demand I use it to fund Chloe's extravagant lifestyle. Keeping them in the dark was my only protection. But standing on the tarmac looking at the jet my firm fully owned, I knew the time for hiding was officially over. Marcus held my hand as we stepped into the main cabin. The interior featured cream leather seats and dark walnut tables. I sank into the plush captain's chair, letting out a long breath as the flight attendant immediately brought over a chilled bottle of imported champagne. She poured 2 glasses before discreetly retreating to the front galley. The jet engines roared to life as we taxied down the runway. I sipped the champagne, letting it wash away the tension. We were finally leaving the toxicity behind. But Marcus was not relaxing. While I leaned back, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. He dropped it next to my flute. The heavy thud of the paper made me sit up straight. I looked at the folder, then up at his serious face. "We have a problem," he said, stripping away the celebratory mood. "Actually, your father has a major problem." I set my glass down and reached for the folder. "What is this?" I asked, flipping it open to the first page. "It is a financial dossier on Bryce," and your father, Marcus explained, leaning forward. "My team has been quietly investigating Bryce's background for the last 4 months. Something about his story never added up. He bragged about his generational wealth and his elite investments. But whenever the check arrived at a family dinner, he miraculously forgot his wallet, or claimed his accounts were temporarily frozen due to international transfers." I scanned the first few pages of the document, feeling my jaw tighten. The papers were highly detailed bank statements, loan applications, and credit reports. "Bryce does not have a trust fund," I said, reading the highlighted text. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "He does not have a dime, Nia. His family went bankrupt a decade ago. The country club memberships, the luxury cars, the designer suits are all funded by high-interest credit cards. He is an absolute fraud. But that is not the worst part. Look at page 7. I flipped through the thick stack of papers until I found the designated page. It was a commercial loan agreement from a private lending firm. The loan amount was staggering. It was for $3 million. But what made my blood run entirely cold was the section listing the collateral and the signatures at the bottom. Bryce had taken out this massive loan to fund his lavish lifestyle and to pay for the extravagant baby shower my mother was currently throwing. And right next to Bryce's forged signature was the clear, unmistakable handwriting of my father. Desmond had legally co-signed the $3 million loan. My father secretly co-signed this. I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He used the family assets as collateral. Marcus nodded slowly. Your father used the ancestral estate in South Carolina to back the loan. He risked the land your great-grandfather bought after emancipation just to impress a broke white man. Vivian and Desmond believed Bryce was their ticket to elite society, so they gambled everything to keep him happy. They literally gave away your heritage to fund a balloon arch and a fake lifestyle. The sheer scale of the betrayal knocked the breath right out of my lungs. My parents had skipped my wedding because they thought I was a poor embarrassment. Meanwhile, they were secretly bankrupting our entire bloodline to support a parasitic liar. They handed over the only real wealth our family possessed because they were blinded by their own greed and social desperation. I stared at the signature, feeling a hot, violent anger replacing the cold shock. When is this loan due? I demanded, gripping the paper so tightly my knuckles turned white. Marcus reached across the table and flipped the dossier to the very last page. He tapped his finger against a bright red final notice stamp. Bryce missed the final balloon payment yesterday afternoon. Marcus said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. The grace period expired at midnight. The lending firm officially executed the foreclosure clause this morning while you were putting on your wedding dress. The bank legally seized everything, Nia. The ancestral land is completely gone. I stared at the red stamp, my mind racing through the calculations. I looked up at Marcus, meeting his dark, steady gaze. He did not look worried. He looked like a man holding a royal flush. And guess who just acquired that specific private lending firm last month? Marcus asked, a slow, devastating smile spreading across his face. Guess who owns the bank? I stared at him, letting the reality of his words wash over me. We owned the bank. My firm had just seized the asset holding my parents' financial reputation together. A genuine smile finally broke through the lingering tension in my shoulders. I reached across the table and picked up my champagne flute, tapping it gently against his. To our newest acquisition, I said, letting the golden liquid cool the fire in my veins. 2 hours later, the Gulf Stream began its smooth descent through the scattered clouds. I looked out the window as the brilliant turquoise waters of the Caribbean stretched out infinitely below us. A cluster of lush green islands appeared on the horizon, but our jet banked toward one isolated paradise. The island was shaped like a crescent moon bordered by pristine white sand and dotted with luxurious overwater bungalows that gleamed under the intense Bahamian sun. This was Emerald Cay. Just thinking the name made my stomach twist with familiar annoyance. For the past 2 years, Emerald Cay had been the centerpiece of every single family holiday dinner. Bryce never missed an opportunity to casually drop the name of his family's exclusive private island into the conversation. He would lean back in his chair, swirling his expensive bourbon, and complain about the burden of managing such a prestigious tropical resort. He spun elaborate tales about the celebrities who rented their villas and the massive profits his family trust generated from the property. My mother Vivian consumed every single word like it was oxygen. She weaponized Emerald Cay to climb the ranks of her elite social circles. At her exclusive sorority galas and charity fundraisers, Vivian would constantly boast about her daughter Chloe marrying into the elite family that owned a private Bahamian island. She told all her wealthy friends that Chloe would eventually inherit the resort. She even promised to host the next annual charity gala right there on the pristine beaches, letting everyone believe she had unlimited access to the property. Whenever I tried to talk about the commercial buildings my firm was acquiring, Vivian would wave her hand dismissively and tell me that flipping office parks in Atlanta could never compare to owning international luxury real estate. She treated Bryce like royalty and treated me like a peasant who simply did not understand how true generational wealth operated. The jet touched down smoothly on the private runway, snapping me out of my memories. As the aircraft slowed to a halt outside the terminal, I smoothed the skirt of my linen travel dress. The heavy cabin door unsealed and lowered to the tarmac. The hot, salty ocean breeze immediately rushed into the cabin. Marcus placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding me down the stairs. A fleet of black golf carts was parked neatly at the base of the stairs. But it was not just a driver waiting for us. A line of 10 people stood in perfect formation on the hot tarmac. At the front of the line stood a tall, distinguished man in a white linen suit, holding a thick leather portfolio. "Welcome to Emerald Cay, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling," the man said, stepping forward with a deep, respectful bow. "I am Gregory, the general manager of the resort. We are absolutely thrilled to finally welcome you to your property." He did not offer me a welcome cocktail or a printed list of resort activities. He did not ask for a credit card to keep on file for room charges. Instead, he opened the heavy leather portfolio and handed me a pristine stack of legal documents. "Here are the final transition papers," Gregory said, his voice filled with absolute deference. "The title transfers were fully expedited and completed this morning, just as your corporate office requested. Every single bank account associated with the previous ownership trust has been legally frozen and seized. You now have sole executive control over the entire island and all its associated assets." I took the documents, running my fingertips over the embossed seal at the top of the page. The papers confirmed what Marcus and I had orchestrated months ago in complete silence. Bryce's family had not owned Emerald Cay for over 3 years. Their precious trust had gone completely bankrupt due to gross mismanagement and terrible investments. The resort had been quietly bleeding money and facing foreclosure, while Bryce sat at my parents' dining table bragging about its supposed success. When the property finally hit the private distress market, my firm swooped in like a hawk. We purchased the entire island, its luxury villas, its private marina, and its pristine beaches for pennies on the dollar. The bank practically begged us to take the massive debt off their hands. We absorbed the liability, restructured the management, and instantly turned the failing property into a lucrative asset. I looked down at the deed bearing my signature. Bryce had been lying to my parents for years. Vivian had been bragging to the city of Atlanta about an island that legally belonged to the daughter she abandoned at the altar. Gregory cleared his throat politely, gesturing to the line of staff members waiting behind him. "We have prepared the primary owner's suite for your honeymoon exactly to your specifications. We also have the current guest manifest ready for your review. Would you like to head to the estate now, or would you prefer to inspect the resort facilities first?" I looked at Marcus, who was watching me with a look of pure pride. The white sand sparkled in the distance, and the clear water crashed gently against the private docks. The ultimate symbol of my family's social obsession was now literally sitting in the palm of my hand. "Take us to the suite," I told Gregory, handing the portfolio back. "And please make sure the high-speed internet is fully operational. I have a feeling I'm going to make a very important social media post later today." The memory of that rehearsal dinner faded as Marcus kissed me. We stood at the altar, newly pronounced husband and wife, beneath a breathtaking arch of white roses and lush trailing greenery. The string quartet swelled into a joyous, uplifting symphony. As we turned to face our guests, the contrast in the seating was violently clear. To my right, Marcus's family and friends erupted into applause, their faces glowing with genuine happiness and unconditional love. To my left, the 50 empty chairs sat in pristine, mocking silence. My mother, my father, my sister, my entire bloodline had chosen a balloon arch and a fake display of wealth over my wedding day. But as Marcus laced his fingers firmly through mine, I did not feel a single shred of sorrow. I felt lighter than I had in 3 decades. I was finally free from their toxic performance. We walked back down the aisle, stepping out into the sunlit courtyard of the botanical gardens. The plan was to head straight into the grand ballroom for our reception, a lavish space I had meticulously designed with crystal chandeliers, towering floral centerpieces, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate. But before we could even take a moment to celebrate our new marriage in private, the heavy glass doors of the venue swung violently open. The head venue manager, a usually composed and impeccably dressed man named Thomas, practically ran toward us. His face was entirely pale, his breathing shallow, and he was clutching his silver clipboard to his chest like a shield. He looked absolutely terrified, completely stripping away the polished professionalism he had maintained for the last 6 months of event planning. "Nia, Marcus, I am so incredibly sorry to interrupt this sacred moment," Thomas stammered, grabbing my arm and pulling us into a quiet alcove away from the gathering guests. "We have a massive crisis in the kitchen, and I simply did not know what else to do." Marcus immediately stepped in front of me, his protective instinct flaring up instantly. "What is going on, Thomas? The guests are about to enter the ballroom for cocktail hour. Is there an issue with the floral setup or the seating arrangements?" Thomas wiped a heavy bead of sweat from his forehead. "The setup is absolutely perfect. It is the catering. The entire service has been halted since 8 o'clock this morning." I frowned, my perfectly cultivated calm beginning to crack at the edges. "Halted. We paid the $50,000 deposit months ago. We confirmed the Wagyu beef and truffle risotto tasting menu last week. Why on earth is the kitchen halted on the day of the event?" Thomas looked down at his clipboard, his hands visibly shaking. "Because your mother called us this morning. She called our main corporate office in an absolute panic. She told our staff that the wedding had been violently called off. She said you and Marcus had a terrible falling out last night and that the entire event was canceled permanently." I stared at him, the sheer magnitude of Vivian's deceit settling over me like a suffocating weighted blanket. She called you on my wedding day to cancel my catering. It gets much worse, Thomas said, his voice dropping to a harsh, nervous whisper. She did not just try to cancel the service. She demanded that our kitchen staff box up the entire 5-course meal for 200 people and immediately transport it to the Oakwood Country Club across town. She stated that since the food was already paid for, it needed to be redirected to her other daughter's baby shower to avoid unnecessary waste. Marcus let out a low, dark chuckle that held absolutely no humor. She tried to steal our wedding reception food to feed Bryce's family. Thomas nodded quickly, flipping through the papers on his clipboard. Yes. And she also demanded that the remaining balance of your venue deposit be refunded directly to her personal credit card. When my staff informed her that we could not authorize a transfer of venue location or financial funds without your direct signature, she became completely irate. She sent us a formal cease and desist email on what looked like official legal letterhead, claiming she was the primary financial sponsor of this wedding and that we were illegally holding her assets hostage. Our corporate office panicked and froze the kitchen staff until we could get legal verification from you. The puzzle pieces slammed into place with devastating clarity. Bryce's credit card had declined at the rehearsal dinner because he was broke. My parents had drained their own savings accounts trying to keep up with his fake old money lifestyle. They did not have the cash to pay the country club for Chloe's lavish baby shower. So Vivian decided to sabotage my wedding, steal the 5-star catering I had quietly paid for, and try to extort a cash refund from my venue to cover their bouncing checks. She was willing to ruin the most important day of my life just to make sure Chloe's baby shower looked perfect for a group of superficial strangers. I felt a cold, calculating calm wash over my entire body. My mother had played her final desperate card, and she had played it terribly. Thomas. I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, cutting through his panic. Did my mother sign a single contract with this venue? No, Thomas replied quickly, shaking his head. Did she process a single payment for this event? No, he said again with absolute certainty. Everything was paid through your private corporate account. I calmly unclasped my small bridal clutch and pulled out my heavy metal black card. I handed it directly to the panicked manager to fully cover all of the remaining venue balances and double the kitchen staff pay. Then I smiled coldly at him and clearly told the manager, send the invoice to Bryce's family trust. Let us see what happens when it bounces. The wooden doors of the owner's suite swung open to reveal a private sanctuary suspended over the turquoise ocean. The space was wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass, showcasing the horizon. An infinity pool blurred into the Caribbean Sea below. Marcus walked to the wet bar and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water while I sank into the white linen sectional. I kicked off my shoes, letting my feet rest against the stone floor. The silence of the island was a sharp contrast to the chaotic betrayal unfolding back in Atlanta. I pulled my phone from my clutch and connected to the high-speed network. I needed to see exactly what my family was doing with the stolen hours of my wedding day. I tapped the Instagram icon and typed in my sister's perfectly curated handle. Chloe had a public profile naturally. She lived for the validation of strangers. A purple ring around her picture indicated fresh stories. I tapped the icon and the screen immediately flooded with an aggressive display of manufactured luxury. The first video panned across the grand terrace of the Oakwood Country Club. It was an absolute spectacle of excessive spending, the kind of over-the-top $100,000 production designed specifically to mask financial desperation. Towering arches of imported white orchids and cascading wisteria framed a custom-built stage. Dozens of tables were draped in heavy silk and adorned with towering crystal centerpieces that cost more than the average mortgage payment. The guest list was a calculated mix of Atlanta's elite African-American socialites and Bryce's stiff white relatives sipping mimosas. It was a masterclass in social climbing. Every single detail was meticulously planned to project an image of generational wealth. A string quartet played softly, while waiters circled with silver trays of expensive caviar and champagne. My mother had spared no expense to impress Bryce's family. The profound irony was that I was sitting on the private island Bryce claimed to own, while my mother paraded around a rented country club terrace, pretending she was royalty. I watched the stories string together seamlessly. Chloe posing with socialites she barely knew, Bryce shaking hands with investors he was secretly trying to defraud. My father Desmond standing by the ice sculpture laughing loudly, while a $3 million foreclosure loomed silently over his ancestral home. They looked so triumphant, so completely oblivious to the financial guillotine swinging right above their heads. I tapped to the next video and the camera focused entirely on my mother. Vivian stood in the center of the terrace holding a microphone. She wore a tailored emerald green dress. She raised her champagne flute, and the entire terrace fell silent to listen to her toast. The person recording the video had captured a perfect angle of her glowing face. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate the expansion of our beautiful family." Vivian began, her voice dripping artificial sweetness. "When a mother raises daughters, she prays that they will find partners who elevate them, partners who understand the true meaning of prestige and legacy." She gestured grandly toward Chloe and Bryce, who were sitting on plush velvet thrones at the head of the terrace. "Chloe, you have always been the absolute pride of our bloodline. You have married into true historical wealth, and you are bringing a child into a world of undeniable privilege. It is so refreshing to see a young woman understand her worth instead of settling for less." My chest tightened as she continued. She was not just praising Chloe. She was actively using a public microphone to humiliate me on the exact day I was getting married. "I know some people choose a different path," Vivian said, her tone shifting into mock sympathy. "Some people choose to struggle. They choose quaint little budget ceremonies and risky business ventures that yield nothing but stress. But not our Chloe. She secured a legacy. To Chloe and Bryce, the undisputed future of this family." The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Bryce beamed with unearned pride. Chloe rested a delicate hand on her rounded stomach, looking like a smug queen accepting tribute from her loyal subjects. Marcus stopped pouring his drink and stared at the screen over my shoulder. His jaw flexed with visible anger. "She is actively trashing your wedding day in front of 200 people," he said, his voice dangerously low. "She is doing it to validate a man who is literally bankrupting her husband." I did not respond right away. My eyes were completely locked on the screen. The video had zoomed in closely on Chloe as she stood up to hug my mother. The sunlight caught something sparkling brilliantly against Chloe's collarbone. I paused the video. I placed 2 fingers on the screen and zoomed in as far as the resolution would allow. My heart hammered, a sharp, hot wave of absolute fury rising in my throat. I stared at the intricate platinum setting and the teardrop-shaped canary diamond resting against my sister's skin. It was our late grandmother's vintage diamond necklace. The heirloom piece had been in our family for 4 generations. When my grandmother passed away 5 years ago, her legal will explicitly stated that the necklace was to be given directly to me. She knew I cherished the history behind it, while Chloe only cared about modern brand names. But when the estate was settled, Vivian claimed the necklace had been tragically lost during the transition. She forcefully swore to all the lawyers that the heavy steel safe was completely empty. I had spent years mourning the loss of the only physical connection I had left to the woman who actually loved me unconditionally. And right now, it was sitting around Chloe's neck, being proudly flaunted as a shiny prop for her fake society friends. Vivian had certainly not lost the beautiful necklace. She had maliciously stolen my rightful inheritance just to drape it right over her precious golden child. Seeing that stolen necklace was the final catalyst. For my entire life, I had played the role of the quiet and accommodating daughter. I had absorbed every career insult and swallowed every backhanded compliment about Marcus. I had allowed my parents to openly favor my sister because defending myself always felt like a waste of breath. I had even let them skip my own wedding to attend a baby shower funded by a con artist. But stealing my grandmother's necklace to crown Chloe as the ultimate prize was an unforgivable violation. I was absolutely done being the silent black sheep of this family. I looked up from my phone screen and met Marcus's steady gaze. He saw my cold resolution and gave me a single understanding nod. I stood up from the plush white linen sectional and walked straight out onto the massive wraparound balcony of the owner's suite. The late afternoon sun was descending, painting the Bahamian sky in brilliant strokes of gold and violet. The infinity pool reflected the vibrant colors merging seamlessly with the crystal-clear ocean stretching out before us. It was a breathtaking view of absolute triumph. Marcus followed me outside holding his glass. I handed him my phone and stepped up to the edge of the glass railing. The tropical wind caught my travel dress, making it billow beautifully. "Take a picture," I told him. "Make sure you get the entire private marina and the main resort pavilion in the background." Marcus smiled, pulling up the camera application. He stepped back to capture the sheer magnitude of our property. He took several shots, ensuring the lighting perfectly highlighted the luxurious estate we now entirely owned. I took the phone scrolling through the images until I found the perfect one. I looked powerful and unbothered, standing on the balcony of the exact resort my sister's fake billionaire husband claimed to possess. I opened my Instagram application and selected the photo. I did not apply a single filter. The raw truth was stunning enough. I tapped the caption box and let my fingers fly across the keyboard. "Enjoying my honeymoon at the newest acquisition of my private equity firm. A special thanks to the former owners, Bryce's family, for going bankrupt and selling this gorgeous island to me for dirt cheap. Cheers to being truly self-made." I read over the words, feeling a deep, satisfying thrill radiate through my chest. The caption was lethal. It completely shattered the illusion my parents sacrificed everything to maintain. I moved to the tagging section. I deliberately tagged Chloe, Vivian, Desmond, and Bryce. I also tagged the Oakwood Country Club location, making sure anyone browsing the geotag would immediately see my post. I did not hesitate. I pressed the share button. The upload progress bar shot across the top of my screen, and the image officially dropped onto my public timeline. I walked back into the suite and tossed the phone face down onto the marble wet bar. Marcus wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me against his chest. I buried my face in his neck, inhaling his familiar cedarwood cologne. "We are completely changing the narrative," he whispered, kissing the top of my head. I nodded, feeling my familial guilt completely evaporate. "They wanted a show," I replied, pulling back to look at my husband. "I am just giving them the finale." We spent the next hour ignoring the outside world. We ordered a lavish seafood dinner directly to the suite and opened a bottle of vintage wine from the private cellar. We ate on the balcony, watching the stars emerge over the Caribbean Sea. It was the most peaceful meal of my entire life. I was no longer carrying the crushing weight of my family's toxic expectations. But while Marcus and I enjoyed our private island sanctuary, an absolute hurricane was making landfall back in Atlanta. My phone, which was still sitting face down on the wet bar, began to vibrate. It buzzed once, then twice, then shifted into a continuous, relentless hum. The device was practically dancing across the polished marble surface. I ignored it, focusing entirely on my husband and my fresh lobster tail. But the digital storm I had just unleashed was moving with terrifying speed. Because within 60 seconds of me hitting that share button, the post had hit the timeline of every single socialite currently sitting at Chloe's baby shower. Atlanta's elite circles are incredibly small and highly observant. The women Vivian had invited to the country club were the exact same women who meticulously tracked wealth and status. Many of them followed me on social media simply because I was Vivian's other daughter. They were sitting at those tables, drinking expensive champagne and listening to my mother brag about her prestigious bloodline when their phones simultaneously lit up with my notification. I could easily imagine the scene unfolding at the Oakwood Country Club. A collective gasp rippling across the pristine terrace as perfectly manicured fingers zoomed in on my photo. The immediate frantic whispering behind silk napkins, the rapid sharing of my post through private text messages under the tables. My caption provided undeniable proof that Bryce was a complete fraud. It exposed the fact that his family was bankrupt, and that I was the actual millionaire who had just purchased their lost empire. The elite guests who had just clapped for Vivian's arrogant speech were now staring at her with poorly concealed pity and vicious amusement. The carefully curated illusion of old money prestige was dead. In less than a minute, my single post had transformed their extravagant $100,000 celebration into the most humiliating public scandal in the history of Atlanta high society. And the absolute best part was that Vivian and Chloe had no idea the room had turned against them. They were still sitting on their velvet thrones, smiling proudly, while their entire social standing burned to ashes right in front of their very eyes. I picked up my phone from the cold marble wet bar and stared at the dark screen for exactly 1 second before swiping down and activating the Do Not Disturb feature. The sudden silence in the suite was profound. I did not want the digital shockwaves of my mother's shattered ego to interrupt the peace of my first night as a married woman. Marcus wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder, as we watched the sun dip below the horizon. We spent the rest of the evening existing in a perfect isolated bubble. We ate fresh lobster, drank vintage champagne, and laughed until our ribs ached. I did not think about Chloe's fake baby shower or the stolen diamond necklace, or the inevitable social fallout occurring across the ocean. I went to sleep to the rhythmic sound of Caribbean waves crashing against the wooden stilts of our overwater bungalow, feeling untethered from the toxic chains of my family's expectations. The next morning, I woke up wrapped in crisp white linens with the warm Bahamian sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus was already awake, standing near the edge of the glass balcony with 2 steaming cups of dark coffee. He walked back inside and handed me a mug, his eyes sparkling with a mix of deep affection and sharp anticipation. He knew exactly what was waiting for me. I took a slow sip of the rich coffee, grounding myself in the quiet reality of our private island before reaching for my phone on the nightstand. I took a deep breath and toggled off the Do Not Disturb icon. My phone instantly seized. The screen froze entirely as an avalanche of digital notifications attempted to process simultaneously. The device vibrated so violently in my palm that it almost slipped from my grasp. The notification counter at the top of the screen ticked upward at a dizzying speed, stopping at exactly 320 missed calls. My text message inbox looked like a chaotic war zone. I had hundreds of unread messages from aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who had spent the last 5 years treating me like an invisible charity case. I opened a message from Aunt Patricia, the woman who had loudly agreed with my mother's cruel assessment of my career just a few years ago. Her text was frantic. "Nia, please tell me this is a joke. Are you actually the owner of Emerald K? Vivian told us you were struggling to pay rent. Please call me immediately." I scrolled down to a message from my cousin Derek, who had openly mocked my business degree at our last Thanksgiving dinner. "Nia, the entire country club is talking about your Instagram post. Bryce's parents practically ran out of the venue. Did you really buy their bankrupt estate? Everyone is saying you are a billionaire." The sheer whiplash in their tones was staggering. The family members who had blindly consumed my mother's toxic narrative about my supposed financial failure were now desperately trying to align themselves with my sudden wealth. They were in a state of utter shock, realizing that the daughter who was routinely dismissed as the broke black sheep had just casually humiliated the golden couple on a global scale. I ignored every single text message and navigated straight to my voicemail inbox. There were dozens of recorded messages, but the most recent notification commanded my full attention. It was a 3-minute hyperventilating voicemail from Vivian left at 11 o'clock last night. I placed my coffee mug on the bedside table and tapped the speaker icon. I wanted Marcus to hear exactly how my mother reacted when her precious house of cards finally collapsed. The audio began with a sharp gasp for air, followed immediately by a guttural screech. "Naya, you take that post down right now." Vivian screamed, her voice devoid of its usual cultured southern drawl. She sounded entirely unhinged. Do you have any idea what you have done? My sorority sisters saw it. The country club board members saw it. Bryce's family saw it, and they are demanding answers. You are ruining your sister's reputation on the most important day of her life. I leaned back against the headboard, listening to the panic vibrating through the speaker. She was not angry about the truth being exposed. She was furious that she could no longer control the narrative. You are a liar, Vivian shrieked, her breathing ragged and heavy. You are a jealous, spiteful college dropout who cannot stand to see Chloe happy. Bryce is a successful venture capitalist. His family owns international real estate. You did not buy that island. You are probably just renting a cheap room and using Photoshop to embarrass us. I demand that you delete that post immediately and issue a public apology to your sister. You are destroying everything we have built. If you do not answer this phone right now, I am going to call my lawyers and sue you for defamation. Her desperate threats echoed through the luxurious master suite of the island I legally owned. It was a pathetic display of a woman rapidly losing her grip on reality. But just as Vivian paused to take another ragged breath, the background noise of the voicemail shifted. I could hear the distinct, chaotic sounds of the country club terrace, silverware clinking against china and the low murmur of confused guests. Then another voice cut sharply through the audio. It was my father, Desmond. His voice was completely stripped of its usual arrogant bluster. He sounded panicked, embarrassed, and terrified. The audio picked up his frantic shouting aimed directly at someone else in the room. What do you mean the credit card is declined? Desmond yelled, his voice echoing loudly in the background of Vivian's voicemail. Try it again. Try all of them. The deposit was supposed to clear yesterday. You cannot shut down the venue right now. The audio file ended with a sharp metallic click, leaving a heavy ringing silence in the massive master suite. I stared at the phone resting on the cool marble counter. Marcus reached out and wrapped his warm hand around my waist, pulling me firmly against his side. We had just heard the exact moment my family realized their entire world was completely collapsing. A genuine smirk crossed my face, but before I could even savor the absolute poetic justice of Desmond yelling at a country club manager, the screen of my phone lit up once again. A new text message notification flashed across the locked screen. It was from my father. I picked up the device and swiped the notification open, staring at the aggressive block of text. The words practically screamed off the digital display. Nia, you need to wire $50,000 to my account this exact second. The event manager here is actively threatening to call the local police for theft of services. His accounts are temporarily frozen because of some bank error, and Vivian is having a literal panic attack in the bridal suite. If you do not send this money right now to cover this baby shower, I am officially cutting you out of the family trust. You will be permanently disinherited from the ancestral land. Do not test me today. My breath caught sharply in my throat. The ancestral land. In our family, the heir's property was not just a plot of dirt in rural Georgia. It was a profoundly sacred legacy. That specific acreage had been passed down through our family since the late 1800s, purchased by our ancestors the moment they were emancipated. It was the physical embodiment of our history, our survival, and our deep generational pride. For my entire life, Desmond had used that land as the ultimate weapon of psychological compliance. He held the legal trust over our heads like a loaded gun, demanding absolute perfection and blind obedience. If you stepped out of line, you lost your history. If you embarrassed the family name, you were permanently erased from the legacy. He knew exactly how much that land meant to me. I had spent countless childhood summers running through those ancient oak trees, listening to my late grandmother tell stories about the strong people who built our family from absolutely nothing. Chloe absolutely hated the huge property. She complained endlessly about the summer mosquitoes and the severe lack of cellular service. But Desmond was perfectly willing to hand the entire legacy over to Chloe and her fraudulent husband while threatening to sever my roots forever, simply because I refused to fund their manufactured socialite fantasy. He was fully prepared to let me go. I read the text message a second time, letting the sheer audacity of his demand wash over me. He was standing in a rented venue surrounded by angry vendors and wealthy socialites, watching his golden child face absolute public ruin. Instead of holding that boy accountable for bringing them into this massive financial disaster, Desmond was trying to extort his newlywed daughter for $50,000. He wanted me to pay for the exact same event where my mother had just publicly dragged my name through the mud. The sheer entitlement was absolutely breathtaking. I looked at Marcus. He was reading the screen over my shoulder. His jaw tightened and his eyes grew dark with a fierce, protective anger. "He is trying to hold your heritage hostage," Marcus said, his voice vibrating with disgust. "He is trying to force you to quietly save them from a mess they created. Do not give them a single dime, Nia. They do not deserve your money or your mercy." I turned away from the wet bar and walked slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the endless turquoise ocean. I thought about the little girl who used to play in the dirt of that Georgia land, desperate for her father to notice her. I thought about all the years I spent shrinking myself to make Chloe look bigger. I thought about the beautiful vintage diamond necklace sitting securely around her neck right now. Desmond thought the threat of losing the land would break me. He thought the fear of being formally disowned would make me panic and blindly transfer the funds. He fundamentally misunderstood who he was dealing with. I was no longer the desperate daughter seeking his validation. I was a highly successful private equity executive who had just orchestrated the legal acquisition of an entire tropical island. I understood leverage better than anyone in my family. I knew that power only exists if you actually surrender to it. I was never going to surrender ever again. I confidently walked back to the marble counter and picked up my phone. I did not type out a frantic apology. I did not beg him to keep me in the family trust. I did not try to explain why Bryce was a complete fraud. Words were entirely useless with these people. They only responded to undeniable public spectacles. So I decided to give them one final unforgettable presentation. I opened my calendar application and quickly generated a secure digital meeting link. I copied the URL and pasted it directly into the text thread with my father. I silently stared at the flashing cursor for a brief moment, ensuring my emotions were completely locked down. I did not want to sound angry or vindictive. I needed to sound like the absolute authority in the room. I quickly typed out my final response below the link and finally hit send. The delivery notification chimed instantly across the quiet master suite. I slowly placed the heavy phone down on the smooth marble counter and smiled confidently at my handsome husband. The short message was incredibly simple, but it was also devastatingly effective. "Let us talk face to face. Put me on the big screen right now, please." The digital chime of the incoming video call pierced the quiet morning air just seconds after my text message delivered. Desmond had taken the bait. I propped my tablet on the teak patio table, ensuring the camera captured the breathtaking expanse of Emerald Cay behind us. The infinity pool cascaded seamlessly into the crystal ocean, framing Marcus and me in a picture of absolute unbothered wealth. I tapped the green accept button. The screen flickered, and the chaotic reality of the Oakwood Country Club flooded our peaceful sanctuary. Desmond, Vivian, Chloe, and Bryce were crammed into the center of the frame. The contrast was almost cinematic. Marcus and I sat relaxed in lightweight linen, sipping premium coffee in paradise. My family stood bunched together in their stiff, formal wear, their faces flushed with a mixture of profound embarrassment and furious indignation. Behind them, the lavish baby shower was in complete ruins. Waitstaff were actively dismantling the elaborate floral arches and clearing the untouched catered food. A few lingering socialites stood near the exit, shamelessly pointing their phones at my family to record the humiliating spectacle. Vivian looked like she was on the verge of a massive cardiac event. Her perfectly sprayed hair was fraying at the edges, and her mascara had smudged beneath her wide, panicked eyes. She kept glancing nervously over her shoulder at the club manager, who stood near the terrace doors, tapping his foot with crossed arms. Chloe was openly weeping, clutching Bryce and burying her face in his shoulder to avoid the relentless stares of her former friends. Desmond stood at the forefront, holding the phone that was broadcasting this disaster to our island. His face was a mask of pure tyrannical rage. Before Desmond could unleash his usual barrage of angry, aggressive demands, Bryce snatched the device directly from my father. He shoved his face toward the camera, completely abandoning his curated aristocratic persona. His features were twisted in a vicious sneer. Bryce had always looked down on me, but his hatred was now entirely focused on the man sitting quietly beside me. He pointed a trembling finger at the lens, directing his vitriol straight at my husband. "I know exactly what is happening here," Bryce spat, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think you are so smart, Marcus? You think you can just walk into our circles and tear down established families? Nia would never have the spine to pull a stunt like this on her own. You manipulated her. You got into her head and convinced her to post those defamatory lies about my family and our estate." Bryce leaned closer to the screen, his eyes flashing with desperate malice. He resorted to the ugly coded language he had always used behind closed doors when discussing self-made men who looked like Marcus. "You are nothing but a thug in a suit," he sneered, leaning heavily into the microaggressive insult. "You buy a couple of bankrupt properties and suddenly you think you belong in our world. You do not belong here. You have no class, no pedigree, and no right to publicly humiliate my wife. You are trying to drag us down to your level because you know you will never actually be one of us. You forced Nia to lie to the entire country club. My family has owned Emerald Cay for 4 generations. My grandfather built that resort. You are trying to steal our legacy with a fake social media post, and I am going to see you locked in a federal prison for corporate defamation and slander." Desmond nodded vigorously behind Bryce, completely endorsing the racist attack against his own son-in-law. "He has a valid point," Nia Desmond yelled, leaning back into the frame. "Marcus is using you to attack his betters. He is a hostile corporate raider with a massive chip on his shoulder. You need to wire that $50,000 right now to fix the situation, and then you need to pack your bags and leave that man. I will handle the annulment paperwork myself today. We can tell everyone you were coerced." Vivian chimed in, her voice shrill and desperately pleading. "Please, Nia, send the money. Chloe is under so much stress right now. She is pregnant with a true heir. You cannot let this thug ruin her beautiful baby shower. Just send the money and take the post down. We will forgive you. We will let you come back to the family and keep your inheritance." Chloe peeked out from Bryce, her face streaked with heavy dark tears. "Why are you doing this to me, Nia?" she whimpered, playing the ultimate victim for her captive audience. "You have always been jealous of me and Bryce. You just want our life." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not even bother defending myself against her absurd projection. I simply turned my head and looked at Marcus. He had not moved a single muscle during the entire unhinged tirade. He sat perfectly still, radiating a quiet, lethal power that made Bryce look like a child throwing a meaningless tantrum. Marcus slowly lifted his ceramic mug and took a long, deliberate sip of his dark coffee. He set the mug down with a soft clink that echoed sharply through the tablet speakers across the vast physical distance separating us from their crumbling empire. He reached across the table and picked up his tablet. His fingers tapped the screen a few times, pulling up a highly confidential document. He did not look angry. He looked entirely bored by the desperate man screaming on the other end of the connection. Marcus casually rotated the device and held the glowing screen directly up to the camera lens, filling their entire view with the heavily redacted legal contract. "Defamation implies the statement is false," Bryce, Marcus said. His voice smooth and cold as ice, completely shattering their last remaining fragile illusion here today. The color completely drained from Bryce's face. His aggressive posture crumbled instantly, leaving him looking like a deflated balloon. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic stutter emerged. Marcus did not give him a single second to recover. He tapped the screen of his tablet, bringing up a highlighted financial summary. "This is a forensic audit of the so-called Desmond Family Trust," Marcus stated loudly enough for the microphone to pick up every single syllable. My private equity firm conducted a thorough investigation before purchasing Emerald K. We wanted to ensure there were no hidden liabilities attached to the property. What we found was a masterclass in financial deception. Bryce took a step back, bumping into a towering arrangement of white roses that swayed dangerously. "You have no right to look into my private affairs," he stammered, his voice pitching an octave higher. "When you claim ownership of an asset my firm is acquiring, I have every legal right," Marcus countered sharply. He scrolled to the next page. "Let us review the hard facts. The legendary Desmond family wealth evaporated exactly 10 years ago. Your grandfather made a series of catastrophic investments in commercial real estate just before the market crashed. The banks foreclosed on the ancestral properties. The massive trust fund was completely liquidated to settle international debts, and your family was quietly forced to sell off every single valuable asset just to avoid federal bankruptcy charges. Emerald K was the very last piece of the empire, and it was seized by creditors 3 years ago. You do not own an island, Bryce. You do not even own the designer shoes you are currently wearing." The silence on the other end of the video call was absolute. Even the country club staff in the background had stopped clearing the tables, completely captivated by the brutal dismantling of Atlanta's most arrogant socialite. Chloe stared at her husband, her mouth hanging open in shock. She reached out and grabbed his arm. "Bryce, tell him he is lying," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Tell them about your venture capital firm. Tell them about the portfolio you currently manage." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. "He manages absolutely nothing, Chloe. I pulled the public records on his LLC yesterday afternoon. The venture capital firm he loves to brag about was officially dissolved by the state 2 years ago for failure to pay basic administrative fees. He has not held a legitimate job in over 24 months. He is a fraud living entirely on borrowed time and borrowed money." Desmond finally found his voice. His face was a dark mottled purple. "That is enough," he roared, stepping in front of the camera to shield Bryce. "You are making wild accusations without any proof. Bryce is an elite investor. He takes care of my daughter. He provides her with a lifestyle you could never understand." "Oh, I understand the lifestyle perfectly," Desmond, Marcus replied, tapping his screen one more time. "I just did not realize you were the one actually funding it." Vivian gasped loudly, her hand flying to her chest. She stumbled backward as if she had been physically struck by a heavy blow. Desmond's jaw snapped shut. Marcus held the tablet up to the camera again. This time, the screen displayed a series of highlighted bank transfer logs. "These are the financial records from your own personal accounts, Desmond. Did you really think you could hide these massive wire transfers? For the past 2 years, you and Vivian have been secretly funneling tens of thousands of dollars every single month directly into Bryce's personal checking account. You paid for Chloe's diamond engagement ring. You paid for their luxury penthouse lease in Midtown. You even paid for the extravagant honeymoon they took to Dubai last summer. You have been bleeding your own retirement accounts completely dry just to maintain the pathetic illusion that your golden daughter married a billionaire." The absolute devastation on the video call was a masterpiece to witness. Desmond looked like he was going to vomit. Vivian covered her face with both hands, shaking uncontrollably. They had sacrificed their own financial security to buy Chloe a fake fairy tale, and now the entire world was watching the ugly truth bleed out. The country club guests who had been lingering near the exit were now actively whispering and pointing. The pristine facade of the Oakwood elite was gone, replaced by the raw stench of a massive financial scandal. Chloe looked at her parents and then back at Bryce. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. She was not marrying into a dynasty. She was married to an unemployed grifter who was draining her parents dry. But instead of turning her anger toward the man who had lied to her for years, Chloe did what she always did. She found a way to blame me. She burst into loud theatrical tears, violently shoving Bryce away and rushing the camera. "You are ruining my life, Nia," she screamed, her face red and distorted. "You are trying to destroy my baby's future. You have always hated me. You planned this whole thing just to embarrass me at my baby shower, because you are a bitter, jealous failure. How am I supposed to raise my child now? What are we supposed to do for money to survive? She sobbed hysterically, gripping the edges of the phone Desmond was holding. Her perfectly manicured acrylic nails dug deeply into the thin plastic case as she tried to pull the glowing screen closer to her tear-stained face. She completely ignored the undeniable fact that her own husband had just been utterly exposed as a pathetic, lazy, manipulative con artist today. But Vivian could not simply surrender to reality. She desperately needed to somehow save face in front of the few wealthy country club members still watching. She straightened her posture, making a fatal error that changed everything today. Vivian pushed past her weeping daughter and stepped into the center of the camera frame. She smoothed the front of her designer silk dress, attempting to project absolute aristocratic authority. Her hands were trembling, but her chin was tilted upward in a defiant, arrogant angle. She refused to acknowledge the reality of the forensic audit Marcus had just displayed. She had spent her entire adult life curating a flawless social image and was absolutely determined to defend her toxic choices to the bitter end, regardless of the massive collateral damage. "So what if we provided a little financial assistance?" Vivian announced, her voice ringing loudly across the terrace. Her tone was dripping with poisonous self-righteousness. "That is exactly what real families do, Nia. They support each other through temporary liquidity issues. Bryce is a visionary entrepreneur. He is currently developing a massive commercial real estate portfolio that will generate billions. He simply needed some initial capital to bridge the gap between his investment rounds. You are sitting there acting like we committed a crime, but we did what any loving, devoted parents would do for their child." I stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of absolute disgust wash over me. She was actually trying to spin her financial ruin into a badge of maternal honor. "You did not provide a little assistance, Vivian," I replied, keeping my voice dangerously calm and devoid of emotion. "You gutted your own financial stability to fund a scam. You bought a counterfeit billionaire lifestyle for a man who has not worked a legitimate job in years just so you could brag to your country club friends about your prestigious son-in-law." Vivian scoffed, waving her manicured hand dismissively at the camera. "You will never understand, Nia, because you are entirely selfish. You abandoned your family to chase corporate greed. Chloe is actually building a real family. She is giving us a true heir to carry on our legacy. She deserves the absolute best, and Desmond and I were more than happy to provide it. In fact, I am incredibly proud of what we did." Vivian turned her head slightly, making sure the remaining socialites lingering near the exit could hear her grand declaration. She was practically glowing with toxic martyrdom. "We willingly drained every single cent of your leftover college trust fund to help Bryce secure his first major investment property." Vivian boasted, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "You obviously did not need the money since you dropped out of our preferred social circles to play businesswoman. But that was not even enough. So I took the initiative. I personally authorized the transfer of our entire primary family savings account directly to Bryce last month. Every single dollar of our liquid assets went to secure the future of my grandson. It was a brilliant investment." The sheer magnitude of her delusion was breathtaking. Vivian genuinely believed she was delivering a crushing blow. She thought she was publicly proving her ultimate devotion to the golden child, while simultaneously putting me in my place. She expected me to react with jealousy or outrage. She expected the remaining country club guests to murmur in awe at her selfless maternal sacrifice. Instead, absolute dead silence descended upon the terrace. I did not react. Marcus did not react. We simply sat on our sun-drenched balcony watching a woman proudly admit to destroying her own life. But the most profound reaction did not come from me or the shocked spectators. It came from Desmond. My father had been standing just outside the camera frame, trying to maintain his intimidating posture. When Vivian proudly announced that she had drained the primary family savings account, his entire body went completely rigid. He slowly stepped back into the frame and stared at his wife, as if she had just transformed into a terrifying monster. His face lost all of its color, turning a sickening shade of pale gray. He looked suddenly frail and incredibly old. Vivian noticed his silence and turned to him, her triumphant smile faltering slightly. "Tell her, Desmond," she demanded, her voice losing a fraction of its arrogant edge. "Tell your ungrateful daughter that we made the right choice. Tell her about the massive returns Bryce promised us by the end of the fiscal quarter." Desmond did not answer immediately. His chest was heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. His eyes darted wildly between Vivian and Bryce, who was currently staring at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. The arrogant patriarch who had spent decades ruling our family with an iron fist was currently experiencing a massive internal collapse. The pieces of the financial puzzle were violently crashing together in his mind, and the resulting picture was a masterpiece of absolute devastation. "You transferred the primary savings?" Desmond asked, his voice cracking. It was a weak, hollow sound entirely stripped of its usual booming authority. "You gave him the liquid assets." Vivian frowned, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Yes, Desmond. I just said that. I handled the wire transfers myself while you were golfing last month. Bryce needed the capital immediately to secure the downtown commercial lot. It was a time-sensitive deal. Why are you looking at me like that? We discussed helping them. We discussed giving them an allowance from the secondary accounts." Vivian Desmond gasped, gripping the edge of a nearby table to keep his balance. His eyes were wide with a terror I had never witnessed before. The realization was destroying him in real time. "We did not discuss liquidating our primary savings." Vivian rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed by his sudden lack of public solidarity. "It does not matter which account it came from, Desmond. Bryce is going to triple our investment by next month. He showed me the investment prospectus." Desmond looked at Vivian in pure horror. "Vivian, I did not authorize giving him the savings. I only co-signed the loan for the ancestral estate." Vivian stared at my father as the blood rushed out of her face, leaving her pale and trembling. She opened her mouth to argue, but the sheer terror in Desmond's eyes stopped her dead. The reality of their financial annihilation was finally crashing down on them in real time. They had not just lost their liquid assets to a worthless scam. They had leveraged the ancestral land, the sacred property Desmond had held over my head for my entire life, to fund a lazy con artist. Before Vivian could even formulate a coherent response, the background of the video call descended into absolute, unmitigated chaos. The country club event manager, a tall, imposing man with a severe expression and a deeply unsympathetic posture, marched directly into the center of the camera frame. He did not care that they were on a video call. He did not care about their elite social standing. He only cared about the massive unpaid invoice currently resting in his hand. "Mr. Desmond," the manager said, his voice echoing loudly across the terrace, "I have been more than patient today. Your caterers are threatening to walk out with the rented silverware, and the floral team is currently dismantling the centerpieces. I need the $50,000 for this venue rental immediately, or I am locking the doors and calling the local authorities to report massive theft of services." Vivian gasped, clutching her pearls tightly. "You cannot speak to us this way," she shrieked, her aristocratic facade completely dissolving. "Do you know who we are? We are founding members of this prestigious club." "You were founding members, ma'am," the manager corrected coldly. "Your membership dues are currently 6 months in arrears. Now I need a valid credit card, or the police will be arriving in exactly 5 minutes. Chloe grabbed Desmond by the lapels of his tailored suit, shaking him frantically. "Dad, just pay the man!" She screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. "Give him the family trust card. Fix this right now. You cannot let them call the police on my baby shower. My friends are watching us right now." Desmond looked at his golden child, and for the first time in his entire life, he had absolutely nothing to give her. His hands were visibly shaking as he reached into his pocket and pulled out his leather wallet. He stared at the sleek black card inside as if it were a highly venomous snake ready to strike. "I cannot use it, Chloe," Desmond whispered, his voice breaking. He looked older and more fragile than I had ever seen him. "The card is declined. It has been maxed out for 3 entire weeks." The silence that followed was incredibly deafening. Chloe backed away from her father, shaking her head in complete denial. Vivian let out a strangled sob, covering her mouth. The Golden family, the untouchable dynasty, was officially bankrupt. They had nothing left. No savings, no trust fund, and soon no ancestral land. They had sacrificed their entire legacy to buy Bryce a counterfeit empire. Speaking of Bryce, I noticed a sudden frantic movement in the corner of the screen. While Desmond and Vivian were crumbling under the crushing weight of their catastrophic financial ruin, Bryce was quietly backing away toward the terrace doors. The arrogant sneer was entirely gone from his face, replaced by the terrified, wide-eyed look of a cornered rat. He had realized the game was finally over. The money was gone, the truth was out, and the police were potentially 5 minutes away. He turned and made a desperate, panicked break for the exit. Chloe shrieked, noticing his sudden, cowardly departure. "Where are you going right now?" Bryce did not answer her. He shoved past a waiter carrying a tray of half-empty champagne glasses, sending crystal shattering loudly across the stone patio. He sprinted toward the glass doors leading to the main lobby, completely abandoning his pregnant wife and his ruined in-laws without a second thought. But his grand escape was cut abruptly short. 2 massive security guards stationed by the club manager stepped firmly into the doorway, physically blocking his path. Bryce slammed into them, bouncing off their solid frames like a useless rag doll. "You are not going anywhere, sir!" The manager called out, his voice slicing through the ensuing panic. "Nobody leaves this terrace until the invoice is settled in full." Bryce frantically looked around, trapped like a frightened animal. He scrambled backward, pulling out his cell phone and desperately tapping the screen, trying to find a lifeline that simply no longer existed anywhere. Chloe collapsed into a nearby patio chair, burying her face in her hands and sobbing loudly, mourning the sudden death of her unearned billionaire status. Vivian stood frozen, staring blankly at the shattered champagne glasses covering the floor. Desmond looked directly at the camera, his eyes hollow and defeated, silently, pleading for a rescue he knew he did not deserve from me. Marcus and I watched the entire spectacular meltdown from the comfort of our tropical patio. The warm Caribbean breeze ruffled my hair as I took another sip of my premium coffee. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no pity. I only felt a profound, lasting sense of closure. The toxic cycle was finally broken. They had destroyed themselves exactly as I knew they would do. I set my coffee mug down on the teak table and leaned slightly closer to the tablet camera. My voice was perfectly calm, cutting effortlessly through the sounds of Chloe's hysterical weeping and the event manager's stern demands. "Oh, by the way, Chloe," I said, ensuring my tone carried absolute authority, "take off my grandmother's necklace, now." Chloe's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face twisting in sudden, fresh outrage. "What?" She choked out, her hands instinctively flying to her throat to protect the heavy vintage diamond necklace resting there. "You cannot ever take this from me. It belongs to me today, never." Chloe tightened her grip on the heavy platinum chain until her knuckles turned white. She took a clumsy step backward, knocking over a tall silver tray of untouched champagne flutes. The expensive crystal shattered loudly against the stone patio, but she did not blink at the destruction. Instead, she stood amidst the glittering wreckage of her manufactured socialite fantasy and doubled down on her lifetime of unchecked entitlement. The Golden Child programming ran incredibly deep. Even as her fraudulent husband was being detained by country club security and her parents were publicly exposed as bankrupt enablers, Chloe still firmly believed she was the ultimate victim of my supposed jealousy. She looked directly into the camera lens, her tear-streaked face contorting into an ugly mask of pure vindictive rage. She was completely incapable of processing the massive financial catastrophe unfolding around her. Her entire reality was crumbling, but her only concern was maintaining her tight grip on the glittering heirloom resting against her collarbone. It was the exact necklace our late grandmother had explicitly left to me in her original will before Desmond conveniently locked it away in the family vault, claiming it was safer there until I settled down. Vivian had handed it over to Chloe this morning as the ultimate crowning accessory for her royal baby shower. I deserve this necklace! Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing off the stucco walls of the luxury terrace. She gestured wildly toward her slightly rounded stomach. I am the one actually carrying this family forward, Nia. I am giving Mom and Dad their first true grandchild. I am building a real legacy while you are sitting on an island playing corporate dress-up with a man who does not belong in our world. Her voice grew louder and more hysterical, drawing the unwavering attention of the remaining club staff, who were openly staring at the spectacular public meltdown. You are just a barren, selfish career woman, Chloe spat, throwing the ugliest insult she could muster across the digital connection. You care more about your bank accounts and your business deals than you ever cared about this family. You are completely empty inside. That is exactly why you are trying to ruin my perfect day. You cannot stand the fact that I am a mother, and you are just a cold corporate machine. You want to strip me of everything, because you have nothing real in your own miserable life. Mom and Dad gave me these diamonds because I earned them by providing a proper heir. You gave them nothing but disappointment and rebellion. She was hyperventilating now, her chest heaving, as she spat the toxic venom she had learned directly from Vivian. She was actively using her unborn child as a literal human shield to deflect from the undeniable fact that her beloved husband was a broke, unemployed grifter. Vivian snapped out of her paralyzed shock and took a hesitant step toward her younger daughter. Chloe, sweetheart, please lower your voice, Vivian pleaded, glancing frantically at the imposing event manager, who was still tapping his foot impatiently by the terrace doors. People are watching us right now. Do not tell me to lower my voice, Chloe snapped, whirling around to glare viciously at her own mother. I am not taking this necklace off. It is mine. She turned back to the tablet camera, her eyes blazing with a frantic, manic energy. You think you can just command me from 1,000 miles away, Nia? You think you can just snap your fingers and take back the only piece of our grandmother's legacy that I have left? Well, you are entirely wrong. I am wearing it right now, and possession is 9/10 of the law. Bryce told me that explicitly. If you want these diamonds so badly, you will have to fly back here to Atlanta and physically rip them off my neck yourself. And I will call the police and have you arrested for assault. She crossed her arms protectively over her chest, looking like a petulant child, throwing a massive tantrum in a designer maternity gown. She looked utterly ridiculous. Her husband was literally being held hostage by armed security for an unpaid $50,000 catering bill. Her parents were completely penniless, and she was threatening to call the police over a necklace she had essentially stolen from my inheritance. The absolute lack of situational awareness was breathtaking to witness. Marcus leaned back in his comfortable chair and let out a low, appreciative whistle. He did not say a single word, but his quiet, steady amusement spoke volumes. I rested my elbows on the smooth teak table and steepled my fingers together, letting a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. I watched Chloe panting heavily and clutching the jewels like a desperate lifeline. She truly believed she had won a critical battle today. She honestly thought the sparkling diamonds were the actual prize. I let the silence stretch out for 5 agonizing seconds, forcing her to sit uncomfortably in her own toxic echo chamber. Keep the diamonds, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, conversational whisper that somehow felt much louder than her unhinged screaming. The golden child blinked rapidly, her manic energy faltering for a split second. What she asked, her hands still defensively gripping the heavy platinum chain. I do not care about the diamonds, I continued holding, her confused gaze directly through the camera lens. They are completely irrelevant to me now. You can wear them to the federal bankruptcy hearings for all I care. The only thing I actually wanted was the small safety deposit key that was expertly hidden inside the custom latch of that pendant. The vintage clasp contains a tiny, hollow compartment. Chloe stared blankly at the screen, her mouth hanging slightly open. A key, she repeated dumbly. Yes, Chloe, I smiled coldly. The key to the private bank vault holding the original unencumbered deeds to the ancestral land. Chloe's hands dropped from her neck as if the heavy platinum chain had suddenly turned white hot. She stared at the sparkling pendant resting against her collarbone, her tear-streaked face twisting in absolute confusion. She fumbled blindly with the intricate vintage latch, her long acrylic nails scraping aggressively against the metal until it finally snapped open. A tiny silver vault key fell onto the stone patio with a sharp, damning clink. Chloe stared down at the small piece of metal, completely unable to process how her ultimate symbol of royal triumph was actually just a hollow vessel for my leverage. She had spent the entire morning parading around the country club, treating that necklace as a crown, but it was entirely worthless without the documents it was designed to protect. But my eyes were no longer focused on my sister. I looked directly at Desmond. He was swaying heavily on his feet, his face entirely drained of blood. He looked exactly like a man standing on the gallows watching the executioner reach for the lever. "You thought you held all the cards today," I said, my voice echoing through the tablet speakers with merciless precision. "You thought you could use the ancestral land as a loaded weapon to force my financial compliance. You threatened to erase me from the family legacy if I did not wire you $50,000 to save your country club reputation. But you cannot leverage a sacred asset that you no longer legally possess. Tell them, Desmond. Tell your perfect golden daughter and your devoted wife exactly where those original property deeds are right now." Desmond opened his mouth, but only a dry, rattling wheeze escaped his throat. He gripped the back of an ornate patio chair so intensely that his knuckles turned stark white against his dark skin. Vivian whipped her head around to stare at her husband. Her eyes were wide with a rising primal panic. "Desmond, what is she talking about?" Vivian demanded, her shrill voice cracking under the mounting pressure. "The deeds are secure. They are in the private family vault downtown. They have been locked in that vault for 40 years. We check on them every single winter." "They are not in the vault, Vivian," I replied smoothly, leaning forward so my face filled their entire screen. "The vault is completely empty. It has been entirely empty for 6 months. Because your arrogant husband willingly handed the most sacred piece of our family history directly over to a desperate con artist." Vivian grabbed Desmond by the arm, shaking his rigid frame violently. "Tell me she is lying to us, Desmond," she shrieked. "Tell me you did not touch the sacred land." Desmond slowly raised his head. The tyrannical, demanding patriarch, who had ruthlessly controlled my entire existence, was completely gone. In his place stood a hollow, broken old man who had just destroyed his own bloodline. "He said it was a guaranteed institutional return," Desmond whispered, his voice trembling with a profound, suffocating shame. "Bryce came to me privately 6 months ago. He claimed he had exclusive inside information on a massive commercial crypto portfolio. He swore to me it was an absolute certainty. He promised we could easily triple the family wealth in less than a year, making us untouchable. But his venture capital firm required hard physical collateral to secure the initial leverage." Chloe staggered backward, stepping heavily on the tiny silver key she had just dropped. "Bryce," she gasped, her voice barely audible. "You let Bryce use our family land for crypto. It was 100 pristine acres of undeveloped South Carolina real estate," Desmond continued, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes and tracking slowly down his weathered cheeks. "It was the absolute only asset we had left that carried zero debt. Bryce handled all the legal paperwork himself. He brought the bank executives directly to my private study. I signed the transfer authorizations without consulting our lawyers. I handed him the original deeds to the land our ancestors literally bled to acquire. And where is that high-yield investment now, Desmond?" I pressed, refusing to let him look away from the camera lens. "Tell Vivian exactly what happened to her sacred legacy." Desmond covered his face with his trembling hands, letting out a wretched guttural sob that echoed painfully across the terrace. "The market crashed," he wept. "The entire foreign exchange collapsed 3 weeks ago. The lead brokers were formally indicted for federal wire fraud. The accounts were frozen. Everything is completely gone." He looked up, his eyes locking onto Vivian with pure, unfiltered terror. The bank immediately initiated the accelerated foreclosure clause on the collateral. They finalized the legal seizure exactly 48 hours ago. The land is gone, Vivian. The bank owns it all now. The country club terrace fell dead silent save for the sound of Desmond taking ragged, gasping breaths. Even the aggressive event manager had stepped back, recognizing the sheer historic magnitude of the tragedy unfolding before him. The immediate financial ruin was devastating, but the permanent loss of the ancestral land was a spiritual death blow. That specific 100 acres in South Carolina was purchased by our great-grandfather the exact moment he was legally emancipated. It was the physical manifestation of our survival, our profound pride, and our enduring bloodline. And Desmond had gladly handed it over to a mediocre grifter to fund an illusion. Vivian watched the empty space where Bryce had just been standing. The golden son-in-law she had endlessly praised while viciously belittling my own husband. And he lost the land, Vivian whispered, her voice cracking. She slowly turned to look at Chloe, who was hyperventilating heavily. Then Vivian looked back at Desmond. She could no longer stand. Her knees completely buckled beneath her. She collapsed heavily onto the cold stone patio. My ancestors, Vivian wailed, dropping down. Our bloodline legacy is permanently gone because of your lazy, worthless white son-in-law. The agonizing sound of Vivian weeping on the hard stone patio echoed through the tablet speakers, filling our quiet, tropical balcony with the undeniable noise of absolute defeat. She remained crumpled on the ground, her designer maternity shower dress pooling around her in a pathetic display of shattered arrogance. For my entire life, my mother had weaponized our family history, using the tale of our ancestors acquiring that South Carolina land to justify her elitist behavior and demand utter perfection from me. Now she was literally crawling on the floor, mourning the absolute destruction of that very same legacy. Desmond did not move to help his wife. He stood completely paralyzed, staring blankly at the shattered champagne glasses near his feet. His hands hung loosely at his sides, devoid of the iron-fisted control he had exerted over our family for decades. He was a ruined monarch, stripped of his kingdom and his dignity in front of the very high society peers he had sacrificed his own daughter to impress. Beside me, Marcus finally shifted in his chair. My husband had remained perfectly silent throughout the entire video call, letting me handle the people who had tormented me for years. He had watched my parents insult our marriage and elevate a con artist over our genuine bond. He had witnessed Chloe hurl venomous insults about my choice to prioritize a career over a traditional family. But now, as the true magnitude of Desmond and Vivian's betrayal hung heavily in the air, Marcus decided it was time to step into the frame. He leaned forward, resting his forearms casually on the teak table. His presence was immediately commanding. He did not need to shout or throw a tantrum to assert his dominance. He simply possessed a quiet, lethal authority that instantly demanded absolute attention. Desmond, Marcus said, his voice deep and dangerously calm. It was a tone that completely cut through Vivian's hysterical sobbing and forced my father to lift his hollow eyes toward the camera. You have spent the last 3 years making it abundantly clear that I was not welcome in your family. You looked down on me because I built my wealth from the ground up instead of inheriting it. You constantly compared me to Bryce, treating him like the ultimate standard of success, simply because he knew how to wear a tailored suit and parrot the right financial buzzwords. Desmond flinched visibly, shrinking under the weight of Marcus's unwavering gaze. My father opened his mouth, perhaps to offer a pathetic apology or a desperate excuse, but the words completely died in his throat. He had absolutely no defense. You skipped your own daughter's wedding to worship a man who stole your history. Marcus continued, his words striking like deliberate physical blows. You refused to walk Nia down the aisle because you were too busy co-signing a fraudulent loan for a golden child who never respected you. You handed the physical manifestation of your ancestors' survival directly to a grifter because you were entirely blinded by your own toxic vanity. You sacrificed the one daughter who actually embodied the hard work and fierce determination of your great-grandfather just to appease a man who viewed your family legacy as nothing more than a convenient ATM. Chloe, who had been sitting frozen in her patio chair, suddenly let out a sharp, trembling gasp. She wrapped her arms protectively around her swollen stomach, finally comprehending the sheer scale of the devastation her husband had inflicted. The country club guests, who had lingered to watch the spectacle, were now murmuring in hushed, horrified tones. The event manager remained standing by the exit, his arms crossed over his chest, showing absolutely no intention of dismissing the massive unpaid venue debt. Marcus did not break eye contact with my father. Desmond looked incredibly small, his broad shoulders caved inward, and his face an ashen mask of pure despair. He was finally being held accountable by the very man he had deemed unworthy of his family name. "But my wife honors her roots," Marcus said, his voice softening with genuine affection, as he briefly glanced at me before turning his lethal focus back to the screen. Nia never forgot where she came from, Desmond. She never forgot the blood, sweat, and tears it took to acquire that South Carolina property. While you and Vivian were busy playing socialites at the country club and draining your savings to fund a fake billionaire lifestyle, Nia was actually putting in the work. She was building a legitimate corporate empire. She was tracking the market trends. And more importantly, she was keeping a very close eye on the people you trusted so blindly. Desmond frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. The utter despair in his eyes was briefly replaced by a flickering spark of desperate curiosity. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice a ragged, pathetic whisper. "How could Nia possibly track Bryce? We kept the investment completely private. We never told anyone about the collateral terms." "You did not have to tell us," Desmond Marcus replied, a cold, razor-sharp smile forming on his lips. "You completely underestimated my wife's business acumen. Nia's corporate acquisition firm specializes in identifying and purchasing highly distressed assets. She has built an entire department dedicated to monitoring high-risk commercial real estate defaults and tracking institutional foreclosures across the eastern seaboard. When a massive plot of prime South Carolina land suddenly appeared on a high-risk bank ledger, flagged for an accelerated crypto margin call, her analysts notified her immediately. Vivian stopped wailing and slowly lifted her head from the stone patio. Her tear-streaked face was a twisted mask of confusion. She stared blindly at the camera. "We knew about the foreclosure," Marcus revealed. "We watched Bryce fail spectacularly. We knew the exact moment the bank seized the property. The land went to public auction this morning, and Nia bought it back. She owns it all right now." Vivian remained collapsed on the patio, her wails echoing through the terrace. Marcus's revelation had effectively paralyzed the rest of my family. Desmond stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process the magnitude of the information. For my entire life, my father had treated me as a complete disappointment who refused to fall in line with his grandiose vision. He had weaponized the South Carolina property against me, holding it hostage as the ultimate symbol of our bloodline. Now he was being forced to reconcile the undeniable fact that his flawed judgment had lost that very same legacy, while my corporate success had somehow retrieved it from destruction. I reached off camera and retrieved a thick manila folder from the teak table. I opened it deliberately, allowing the crisp sound of the heavy parchment paper to carry over the digital connection. I pulled out a pristine legal document, adorned with a fresh, embossed county seal, and held it up to the camera lens so they could see the undisputed proof of my purchase. "I bought the land, Dad," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of any sympathetic emotion. "I paid off the massive debt Bryce caused. The ancestral estate is safe." Desmond stared at the document on the screen as if it were a holy relic. The color slowly began returning to his face. The rigid defensive posture he had maintained for decades instantly vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of profound relief. He let out a ragged, breathless sound that was half laugh and half sob. He stumbled forward, practically shoving Chloe out of the way to get closer to the tablet camera. Tears freely streamed down his face, washing away the arrogant patriarch and leaving behind a desperate, grateful old man. "Nia," he wept, pressing his trembling fingers against the screen of the tablet. "My brilliant, beautiful daughter, I knew you had the strength of our ancestors inside you. I always knew it. You saved us, Nia. You saved our entire family from absolute ruin. Vivian immediately stopped wailing. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her tear-streaked mascara and adjusting her posture. The terrifying reality of bankruptcy had vanished from her mind, replaced instantly by the comforting illusion of restored wealth. She actually managed to produce a wobbly, relieved smile, looking at me as if I were suddenly her favorite child. "Oh, thank heaven," Vivian gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "We will call the lawyers immediately and have the deeds transferred back into the primary trust. We can put this ugly little nightmare behind us and focus on the baby. You did the right thing, Nia. You finally stepped up and did your duty for the family. We can even discuss giving you a small seat on the trust board for your efforts." Desmond nodded vigorously, completely ignoring the fact that his wife was already trying to minimize my monumental intervention. "I promise you, Nia, things are going to change around here." Desmond swore, his voice thick with raw emotion. "I will make everything right. I will cut Bryce out completely. I will restructure the entire hierarchy. You will have the respect you always deserved. Just bring the papers home and we will fix all of this." I watched them desperately clinging to their familiar delusions. They had spent 30 years treating me like a worthless outcast, but the second I displayed financial power, they immediately attempted to pull me back into their toxic orbit. They honestly believed I had spent millions of dollars to rescue their bloated egos and restore their counterfeit kingdom. They expected me to happily hand over the keys to the empire they had just gleefully burned to the ground. I slowly lowered the deed, resting it carefully on the table next to my coffee mug. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hands, and offered my father a smile that contained absolutely zero warmth. "You misunderstand me, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that commanded absolute silence across the terrace. "I did not buy this land to save the family trust. The family trust is completely bankrupt and utterly dead. The trust does not own the land anymore. I own it, solely. My name is the only name on this deed." Desmond froze, his grateful tears instantly drying up. "What are you saying?" he rasped, his voice cracking under a fresh wave of rising panic. "I am saying that you no longer have an ancestral estate," I replied, watching the realization finally shatter his fragile hope. "You lost it the second you handed it over to a scam artist. I simply purchased a highly distressed asset at a public auction. It belongs exclusively to my corporate portfolio now. You have no legal rights to it. You have no trust board to put me on. You have absolutely nothing left to offer me." Chloe let out a sharp, terrified squeak, clutching her diamond necklace, as if it could somehow protect her from the devastating truth. Vivian staggered backward, grabbing the edge of a table to keep from collapsing again. "But that land is our home," Desmond pleaded, his voice rising in sheer panic. "The main house, the summer cabins, the hunting grounds. You cannot simply take it all for yourself, Nia. We spend every single July there. We have massive renovations planned for the autumn." "Not anymore," I countered sharply. "In fact, my legal team finalized the property transfer exactly an hour ago, which means your belongings currently stored in the main house are now technically abandoned property. And since my firm has strict liability policies regarding unauthorized individuals on our private land, I strongly suggest you cancel your upcoming July vacation plans immediately. You are all permanently trespassing." The absolute finality of my words struck Desmond like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, gasping for air, as the true scope of his total ruin finally settled over him. My father dropped to his knees on the stone patio. The expensive fabric of his tailored trousers scraped against the rough surface, but he did not seem to care. He held his hands out toward the tablet screen, his fingers trembling violently. He was practically praying to me. "Please, Nia," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic wheeze. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot take the ancestral home. I am your father. I gave you life. I raised you. I made a terrible mistake trusting Bryce, but I was only trying to protect our legacy. I was trying to secure our future. Please, find it in your heart to forgive me. We can share the estate. You can dictate the terms. Just do not erase me from the history my grandfather built. I will do whatever you ask. I will publicly apologize. I will give you my seat at the head of the table. Just let us keep the house. I stared at the broken man begging on his knees and felt absolutely nothing. The little girl who had spent 3 decades starving for his approval was completely gone. You do not have a seat at the table to give me, Desmond, I replied coldly. I bought the table. I bought the house. I bought the very ground you are standing on. There is no shared estate. You chose your legacy the moment you handed our history to a criminal. Vivian lunged forward, shoving her husband aside. Her face was contorted with a vicious primal rage. You ungrateful little brat, she screamed, her shrill voice echoing across the silent country club terrace. You owe us. We are your blood. We are your family. You cannot legally steal our property and lock us out of our own home. I will take you to court. I will sue you for every penny you have. I will ruin your reputation in this city. You are obligated to help us. Family protects family. Your definition of family is entirely conditional, Mom, I stated, leaning back in my chair. You only invoke the word family when you need a human shield or an open checkbook. When I needed my family on my wedding day, you were too busy fawning over a grifter. When I needed support, you told me I was socially unfit and an embarrassment. You chose to elevate Chloe and Bryce because they matched your superficial aesthetic. Now you can suffer the consequences of your shallow investments. You have no legal standing to sue me, Vivian. My corporate lawyers finalized the purchase through a blind auction. It was a perfectly legal acquisition of a foreclosed asset. You have zero claim to the land, and zero money left to pay a lawyer to argue otherwise. Chloe let out a sudden piercing shriek. She was staring past the tablet camera toward the grand entrance of the country club terrace. Through the digital feed, Marcus and I watched as the heavy glass doors swung open. 2 uniformed police officers strode onto the patio, accompanied by a man in a sharp gray suit, holding a leather briefcase. The remaining shower guests scattered like frightened birds, parting ways to let the authorities through. The event manager immediately stepped forward to intercept them, but the man in the suit flashed a gold badge. Bryce, who had been hiding near the mimosa bar attempting to quietly slip out the side exit, suddenly froze. He turned perfectly pale. Bryce Sterling, the lead officer, announced, his voice booming over the quiet patio. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and passing forged securities. Please, place your hands behind your back. Chloe scrambled toward her husband, her expensive heels slipping on the spilled champagne. Bryce, she wailed, grabbing his arm. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you have the money. Tell them you are a billionaire. Bryce did not look at her. He did not look at my parents. He kept his eyes glued to the floor as the officer roughly spun him around and clamped cold steel handcuffs over his wrists. The sharp metallic click echoed loudly through the tablet speakers. The man in the suit opened his briefcase and handed a stack of documents to the event manager. Those are the federal seizure notices, the agent stated clearly. Every asset associated with Mr. Sterling is currently being frozen. Chloe collapsed onto a nearby lounge chair, sobbing hysterically into her hands. The golden couple, the perfect image of high society success, was publicly crumbling into dust. Vivian whipped her head back toward the camera, her face completely drained of blood. The aggressive entitlement she had displayed just seconds ago vanished completely. Naya, please, Vivian stammered, her voice trembling with raw terror. We have nothing. Bryce drained our primary accounts to cover his margin calls before the crash. The bank took the South Carolina estate. Now the police are taking Bryce. We cannot even pay the bill for this baby shower. The event manager is threatening to call the local police on us for theft of services. How are we supposed to get home? We need a wire transfer, Nia. Please just send us a few $1,000s so we can leave this place with some dignity. I looked closely at the frantic crying faces of the family who had gleefully abandoned me at the altar. I watched my father kneeling helplessly on the ground. I watched my sister hyperventilating as her fraudulent husband was marched away in handcuffs. I watched my mother gripping the edge of the table, begging the daughter she had always despised to save her from public humiliation. My husband placed his hand gently over mine, a silent gesture of absolute solidarity. I looked directly into Vivian's terrified eyes. "You wanted an Uber, Mom?" I asked, my voice dropping to a deadly calm whisper. "Better call one now. Your car was repossessed this morning." I reached forward and ended the call. The black screen of the tablet reflected my own face back at me. For the first time in 30 years, I did not see a disappointment or a scapegoat or a dutiful daughter desperately trying to earn her place at a table that was actively being sawed out from underneath her. I saw a woman who had just excised a malignant tumor from her life. The heavy, oppressive chains of toxic familial obligation that had anchored my soul to their miserable expectations were finally completely shattered forever. Every single cruel insult they had ever hurled in my direction had been systematically neutralized by this one defining triumph of undisputed absolute liberation and financial dominance. The absolute silence that filled our tropical balcony was the most exquisite sound I had ever heard. There were no more shrieks of entitlement from my mother. There were no more condescending financial lectures from my father. There were no more breathless panics from my sister demanding I fix a mess she had willingly walked into. There was only the gentle rustle of the palm leaves outside our suite, and the steady, reassuring rhythm of Marcus breathing beside me. He reached over and gently closed the cover of the tablet. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not ask if I felt guilty. He simply poured us both another cup of coffee, leaned back in his chair, and smiled. He knew exactly what this moment meant. We packed our bags later that afternoon and flew back to our home. I am sitting in my living room, watching the evening sun cast long golden shadows across the hardwood floors. The house is completely peaceful. It radiates a quiet, triumphant energy that I have never experienced before. For decades, I was conditioned to believe that my primary function on this earth was to serve as a shock absorber for my family. Society places a very specific crushing burden on Black women. We are expected to shrink ourselves to protect the fragile egos of the men around us. We are instructed to endure absolute disrespect in the name of honoring our parents. We are told to carry the emotional and financial weight of our entire bloodline, and if we dare to set a boundary or demand basic human decency, we are immediately branded as the angry, bitter villain of the story. I played that assigned role for as long as I could stomach it. I dimmed my own light so Chloe could shine. I minimized my corporate success so Desmond would not feel emasculated. I absorbed the venom from Vivian so she could maintain her illusion of matriarchal perfection. But shrinking yourself to fit into a room full of people who are committed to misunderstanding you is a profound form of absolute sabotage. My family did not want a daughter or a sister. They wanted a safety net that would blindly fund their delusions of grandeur. They wanted a mule who would drag their heavy secrets and their massive debts up the mountain while they rode in the carriage sipping stolen champagne. When I finally refused to pull the weight, they discarded me without a second thought. They gladly skipped my wedding day because celebrating my genuine happiness did not serve their social agenda. They chose a con artist over my husband because Bryce offered them a shortcut to the unearned status they craved. They literally traded the blood and sweat of our ancestors for a crypto scam because they believed their own counterfeit hype. I used to believe that preserving our family legacy meant keeping the peace at all costs. I thought it meant showing up to every holiday dinner, swallowing the insults and pretending the passive-aggressive comments were just a quirky family dynamic. But true legacy is not just about holding on to a piece of real estate in South Carolina. True legacy is about protecting your peace. It is about recognizing your own intrinsic worth and refusing to let anyone discount it. It is about breaking the generational curse of toxic loyalty and having the sheer audacity to demand respect. I did secure the ancestral estate. That beautiful 100 acres of pristine land is safely locked away in my corporate portfolio, completely untouchable by Desmond or Vivian or anyone else who might try to leverage our history for a quick payout. The land is safe, but it is also permanently cleansed of their corruption. I have received dozens of frantic voicemails and countless desperate emails over the past few weeks. My parents are currently navigating a massive federal bankruptcy investigation while dealing with the crushing reality of their sudden poverty. Bryce is sitting in a federal holding facility awaiting trial for wire fraud and forgery. Chloe was forced to move into a tiny studio apartment, desperately trying to sell her designer handbags online to pay for her mounting legal fees and impending hospital bills. They constantly beg me to intervene on their behalf. They loudly invoke the sacred word family in every single message they leave. They continuously remind me of my supposed duty to the bloodline. But I press delete every single time without hesitation. I do not feel a single shred of guilt. I do not lose a solitary second of sleep over their predictable downfall. I did not ruin their lives. I simply stopped preventing them from ruining their own. I handed them the exact consequences they ordered and walked away. They skipped my wedding for a facade and they lost their empire to reality. I kept the land, but I lost the dead weight. Has your family ever forced you to play the villain because you refused to fund their illusions? Tell me in the comments. Hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, never let anyone make you feel guilty for outgrowing the table they refuse to let you sit at. Camera slowly pulls out, blurring into a shallow depth of field as Nia smiles confidently. Fade to black.